Yo, what's up guys, Cozy here, bringing you another Genshin Impact video. Today we are going to take a look at Dehya, one of the newest 5-star characters in the game. A character that is currently creating a lot of controversy in the Genshin community due to a few things being off about her. I will give my own honest opinion about Dehya at the end of this video, but for now let us purely focus on the guide itself. We will take a look at her talents, her constellations, her artifacts as well as her weapons, and finally team composition. With that out of the way, let us get right into it. When it comes to Dehya's talents, it is important to point out that she is a mixture of a DPS character as well as a support character. Her constellations, if you decide to pull for them, are going to make her even better at both of these aspects. But for now, let us purely focus on her talents. Dehya's normal attack consists of a 4-hit combo. Unfortunately, as you can see, it barely does any damage and it's also very slow in its execution. The problem here is that it does not really work hand in hand with the rest of her kit. Dehya is all about doing pyro damage, while her normal attack does physical damage. As such, it is an ability that you don't really need to level. In my case it's level 9, but that is only because of the showcase. With that, let us focus on her more important abilities, her elemental skill, as well as her elemental burst. Dehya's E ability has a lot of text, but it is fairly easy to explain. Whenever you activate her elemental skill, you summon a big AoE zone and do a little bit of pyro damage. We are going to talk about that damage aspect in a moment, but for now let us focus on what the zone actually does. While standing inside it, there are 3 things that happen. First, you do additional pyro damage via coordinated attacks. Just like I mentioned, we will talk about this once we get to the numbers. Secondly, some of the damage you take is then redirected to you via damage over time. This damage over time modifier works for 48% of the damage you take and even works when Dehya is not on the field. This allows her to fulfill a support role where you basically summon the zone and then switch to another character. Whenever that character takes damage, 48% of that damage is then redirected to Dehya. And lastly, any character that stands inside that zone gains increased resistance to being interrupted. This resistance is even enhanced once you unlock your first passive and allows characters like Scaramouche or Ganyu to attack without getting knocked around. But keep in mind that this effect is only active for 9 seconds after unleashing her E ability, so you are not completely immune to being interrupted. Furthermore, you have the option of relocating her elemental skill while it is active. This will not refresh the duration of it, but it will do pyro damage whenever you do so. With that out of the way, let us now get into the actual numbers. Now, just like I mentioned, whenever you activate Dehya's elemental skill, you do AoE pyro damage to opponents around you. This also remains the same for whenever you relocate her E ability. It is represented by the Indomitable Flame modifier as well as the Raging Flame modifier, and both of them entirely scale off your attack. Additionally, whenever you attack an opponent while standing inside her zone, you unleash coordinated pyro attacks. These pyro attacks can be triggered every 2.5 seconds and are shown by the field damage modifier in her talent screen. This aspect of her ability scales off your attack as well as your max HP. And finally, when it comes to her E ability, the amount of redirected damage cannot exceed 200% of Dehya's max HP, and the zone itself is active for 12 seconds with a cooldown of 20 seconds. So there is a downtime of 8 seconds. So basically, as a summary, Dehya's E ability is definitely worthy of being pushed all the way to level 9, and if you plan on maining her, you can even push it up to level 10. I myself do plan on doing that, but I'm currently missing boss materials, so yeah, it is what it is. Now let us talk about her elemental burst. When it comes to elemental burst, Dehya enters a state where she automatically attacks opponents around her. This allows you to technically let go of your keyboard and your mouse, but there are still a few things you need to pay attention to. First, you still have to adjust the direction she attacks in. She might be attacking automatically, but you don't want her to wander off somewhere, right? Additionally, whenever you press your attack button shortly after she did the swing during her elemental burst, the next one will happen faster. This allows you to do more attacks during her elemental burst. Now, if we compare this to her elemental burst where you actually let go of your keyboard and your mouse, we end up with at least 3 more attacks. The base version has 6 attacks, plus 1 final attack, and the version where you use your normal attack after each swing has 9 attacks, at least, plus 1 final swing. So it's basically a lot more damage compared to just letting go of your keyboard. The last thing I want to mention when it comes to her elemental burst by itself is that she absorbs the current active E field whenever you activate her Elemental Burst and redeploys it when her Elemental Burst ends. This basically allows you to set up a nice combo attack where you put down your E ability, then use your Elemental Burst, and after it's done, she will put it down again, triggering the first damage instance of her E, and you can then just relocate it in order to trigger the second instance. The problem that comes with her Elemental Burst is that the entirety of it is considered as Elemental Burst damage. So it does not work with characters like Yelan, Beidou or Xingqiu, who require normal attacks for their effects to work. As such, Dehya is kinda limited when it comes to her team composition, but we will talk about that later on. And that is basically all you need to know when it comes to her active abilities. There's one more thing I want to mention, which is currently a hot topic on Twitter, and that is that jumping cancels her entire Elemental Burst. You can dodge during it, but if you jump, then I guess that's just simply it for your Elemental Burst. So don't jump, I guess. Now let us talk about her passives. The first passive is the exact opposite of Rosaria's passive and basically increases your traveling speed by 10% during the daytime. The other two passives work around the mitigation mechanic of her E ability. The first one is that whenever Dehya drops below 40% HP, she will heal for 20% HP, and this can happen every 20 seconds. The second one is that the mitigated damage you take, so basically the dot damage, is reduced by 65% whenever you relocate your E ability or whenever you use your Elemental Burst. Also, like I already mentioned, this passive includes the resistance increase you gain after using your Elemental skill. Now let us take a look at her constellations. As you can see, I already have one of her constellations unlocked. I'm not a whale or anything like that. I do use a battle pass, so I guess that makes me a dolphin. I'm not entirely sure what the exact name here is. Either way, this guide is meant to be for free to play as well as pay to win people, and I think it is fair enough if we cover her constellations too. Dehya's first constellation is a straight up damage increase to her entire kit. It increases Dehya's max HP by 20%, and it also increases the modifiers of her E and Q abilities when it comes to her max HP. This is arguably one of the best constellations you can get for her. The second constellation changes the duration of her E ability to 18 seconds and also increases the damage of her coordinated attacks. This basically makes it so that you only have a downtime of 2 seconds when it comes to her Fury Sanctum. Her third and fifth constellation increase the level of her elemental skill and her elemental burst by 3 and are basically the same as for any other character in the game. Constellation 4 changes the amount of energy you will gain during her elemental burst and also gives you the ability to heal during it. Each of her attacks now restore 1.5 energy and 2.5% of her health. And finally, Constellation 6 increases the amount of damage you do during her elemental burst as well. It gives you a flat 10% crit rate bonus during her elemental burst, increases the crit damage you do by up to 60%, and prolongs it by up to 2 seconds. There's a small caveat here though, which is that you can only gain the increase to the duration as well as the crit damage whenever you land critical hits during her elemental burst. Each critical hit increases the duration by 0.5 seconds and her crit damage by 15%, so it has some level of RNG to it. And with this, let us finally take a look at the more interesting aspect to any character guide there is, the artifacts. The first thing I should mention here is that depending on the way you want to play Dehya, the stats you choose as well as the artifact sets will be different. If you want to focus on a Vaporize melt composition, you use different sets compared to an elemental burst composition. For this, I will present 3 different playstyles people will probably end up using. One being focused on increasing her baseline damage, the other one on her elemental burst, and finally one being focused on elemental reactions. When it comes to that, everything I'm going to say now is obviously theoretical because I don't know what artifacts you guys have or what sets you have access to. Either way, let us start with her first build, a mono Pyro DPS build. This build focuses on increasing the damage of her elemental skill as well as her elemental burst. When it comes to the stats, you should be fine if you follow the basic principle of what you can see on the screen right now, but let us still go over the stats in more detail. Her circlet comes with either crit rate or crit damage. Depending on what you are lacking, you will choose either the one or the other, but it is important to point out that her signature weapon has crit rate on it, so if you have that one, you will probably end up using crit damage on your circlet. When it comes to her goblet, the choice here is fairly obvious. Pyro damage is the way to go. If you don't have that, you can also use attack percentage. Like I said, it depends on what you have access to, and it also depends on how your substats roll. Regarding her sense artifacts, the best option to use is attack. HP also helps you, but attack scales higher. If you're lacking energy recharge, you could also technically use that, but I personally wouldn't recommend it. And finally, when it comes to her substats, it's the usual. You want to go for crit rate and crit damage, as well as attack, HP and energy recharge. You will not need elemental mastery for this build, and you obviously will not use death rating. One thing to point out here is that the difference between attack and HP is less important once you have unlocked Dehya's Constellation 1, but it is still there. Also, regarding energy recharge, try to be around 180 to 200% and you will be fine. Regarding her artifact sets, Dehya has a lot of options to go for. You can do what I'm doing right now, which is a combination of Gladiator and Crimson Witch. Gladiator increases your attack by 18%, Crimson Witch increases your pyro damage bonus by 15%. If you are missing Gladiator pieces, you could also go for the Shimenava set. Shimenava set bonus is the same as for Gladiator. Or if you're missing Crimson Witch pieces, you could also play a combination of Gladiator and Shimenava. It's entirely up to you when it comes to that. But there are two more options when it comes to sets you can use. The first one is the Tenacity of the Millelith. The 4 set bonus increases your attack by 20% whenever you use an elemental skill, and the 2 set bonus increases your HP by 20%. So it's perfect for Dehya. The third option, which you don't see that often, is the Lava Walker set. The 4 set bonus increases the damage you do against opponents affected by Pyro by 35%. And that is quite a lot. But there's a trade-off, unfortunately, which is that that her 2 set bonus is kind of useless, right? 40% increased resistance to pyro damage, I mean, doesn't really help you at all. So there's a small trade-off, but I think it's definitely worth it. Now when it comes to her Elemental Burst build, everything I just said basically remains the same. You still don't need Elemental Mastery for this build, but the sets change. There are, in my opinion, 2 sets that will shine for the setup. The first one is the Noblesse set, and the second one is the Emblem of Severed Fate. Compared to her first build, this one is technically the better option, because when it comes down to it, most of the damage Dehya does comes from her Elemental Burst anyways. Still, the first build is easier to obtain because it contains the Gladiator set, which you can get basically anywhere in the game. Finally, we have her Elemental Reaction build. In most cases, this will be a Vaporize or Melt build, but it can also be a Burgeon build. This time you want to have as much Elemental Mastery as you can get. Crit rate and crit damage are obviously still important, but Elemental Mastery is your best friend. When it comes to the sets, there are a few options here. You can go for a 4-piece Crimson Witch, or you can go a completely different route. The Gilded Dreams set. It gives you Elemental Mastery, attack, and even more Elemental Mastery until you basically swim in it. Another option, when it comes to the Burgeon reactions at least, is the Flower of Paradise Lost set. The 4-piece bonus will straight up increase the damage you do with Burgeon, but keep in mind, it will do nothing for your melt reactions. With that out of the way, let us now talk about her weapons. When it comes to weapons, there are a lot of different options in the game. Some are better, some are worse, and since there are so many of them, I have prepared a list with the best options out there, so feel free to pause the video whenever necessary. First, let us take a look at free-to-play friendly weapons. The most prominent one is the Luxurious Sea Lord. This weapon keeps up with almost any other weapon in the game. It was available during one of the limited fishing events, and if you have it, then go for it. Unfortunately, if you don't have it, I don't think it's obtainable right now. The other 2 options are the Blackcliff Slasher, which you can get from Paimon's shop for 24 star glitter, or the Prototype Archaic. The Prototype Archaic is a craftable weapon and you can get the materials from your weekly bosses. Keep in mind though that the drop chance for the prototypes is fairly low. Next, we have our Gacha Forcer weapons. To be more precise, we have the Serpent Spine and, I'm gonna butcher that name, Akumaru. I don't know, either way, the Serpent Spine is a Battle Pass weapon, so it's fairly easy to obtain, and Akumaru was available during one of the weapon banners. Unfortunately, that banner is not up right now. When it comes to the Serpent Spine, I also want to quickly mention that a Refinement 5 version of it keeps up with any 5-star weapon in the game, so it is a very good weapon to use. When it comes to 5-star weapons, the options are limited. We have the Beacon of Weed Sea, which is basically Dehya's signature weapon and her best in slot weapon. Other options are the Red Horn Stone Thrasher as a heavy stat stick. It gives you 88% crit damage and that is quite a lot. Or, if you have it, you could also use the Wu's Greystone. This weapon is surprisingly good on Dehya because you can quite easily trigger its passive effect. Each of the attacks during her Elemental Burst snapshot, so it's very likely that you trigger the passive. And those are basically all the options there are for the Elemental Burst build, as well as the baseline approach. Regarding her Elemental Reactions build, there are also a few weapons you can use. We have the Aquamarine and the Rain Slasher. Both weapons come from the weapon banner, though the Rain Slasher is always available due to it being on the standard banner as well. But personally, I would not recommend the Rain Slasher. Only use it if you have no other options. The Aquamarine, on the other hand, is fairly good to use because the passive is quite easy to trigger. And finally, we have the current event weapon, the Mailed Flower. This weapon has good stats, the passive is easy to trigger, and you can basically get it for free. So go and get it. With that, we are getting close to the end of this guide. We only have team composition left, as well as my own honest opinion when it comes to Dehya. Like I said, due to how Elemental Burst works, it is fairly difficult to put Dehya into just any team composition. It kinda depends on what you want her to do. If you want to use her as a support character for a mitigation mechanic, then of course you can put her into any team and simply equip as much HP items on her as you can get. Set bonus HP, substats HP, main stat HP, everything HP, and you will be fine. If you want to use her as a DPS character, you have the option of going Burgeon, Vaporize, Melt, or even a mono Pyro comp, and depending on your choice, the teams change. If you want to play around the Burgeon composition, you simply use Dendro characters as well as Anemo characters to spread the burning effect. Characters that are really good for this composition are Nahida, the Dendro Traveler, or Kaole. Nahida obviously being the best option here, but keep in mind, the Dendro Traveler is also very good. When it comes to Anemo characters, you can use Kazuha or Sucrose. Kazuha basically is the 5-star version of Sucrose, but if you don't have him, simply use Sucrose. She's also very, very good. You can also, on top of that, throw a Bennett into your composition in order to get the Elemental Resonance, so basically 25% more attack, as well as this Elemental Burst, which arguably is one of the best Elemental Bursts in the game. Other characters that you could throw in are Yae Miko or Fischl. They can trigger Overload on your opponents in addition to the Burgeon, which adds a lot of DPS. Keep in mind though, if you want to do that, do it against big opponents that won't get knocked around 24/7. If you want to go down the route of using Vaporize and Melt, you can basically use characters that apply a lot of status effects to your opponents. For Vaporize, you can use Nilo or Kokomi because her E abilities constantly apply Hydro to your opponents. Or you could even use Mona. She can further increase the damage Dehya does with her own Elemental Burst. In the end, it entirely depends on what characters you have. Regarding a meld composition, you can use Rosaria, Kaya or Ayaka. As usual, try to put an Anemo character into the composition as well in order to throw the status effects on your opponents. It makes it much easier to handle, and if you equip the Viridescent Venera set on your Anemo character, you also reduce your opponent's elemental resistance. And finally, we have the composition that I am using, which is arguably the easiest one to use, a mono Pyro composition. You can use that for the Elemental Burst build as well as the baseline build. It works for both of them. Regarding her mono Pyro composition, I will go into more detail because personally I think it's the best composition to use for Dehya. We have Bennett in the team because of his Elemental Burst. That's it basically. All you need to do is to equip as much attack on him as you can get and you're good to go. Next we have Xiangling. First of all, she's in the team because of her Constellation 6. Her Constellation 6 increases your Pyro damage by 15% whenever Xiangling uses her Elemental Burst. Obviously, if you're new to the game, you probably don't have that yet, but don't worry, Xiangling is on almost every second character banner there is, so you will get it in time. Next we have Kazuha. Kazuha has a Viridescent Venera set equipped, and due to the fact that we are mono Pyro, you can basically only swirl the Pyro element, which reduces the resistance of your opponents to Pyro by 40%, so it's a big DPS increase. And of course he's good for grouping up opponents. And next we have Dehya, we already talked about her, right? One thing to point out is that due to the fact that we have at least 2 Pyro characters in this composition, we also unlock the Elemental Resonance, which increases our attack by 25%, on top of everything I just said. And with that, we are basically done. Next, I will give my own honest opinion when it comes to Dehya. I will also include a little bit of Spiral Abyss footage in the background so you can see how she performs outside of a showcase scenario. So yeah, let's get to it. So this will be completely unscripted. It will be raw. It will be my own honest opinion. I don't know if I'm going to say anything harsh. If I do, I don't mean it that way, so keep that in mind. First of all, let me tell you this. I like Dehya. I like her E, I like her Q, I like the way that her abilities are designed, and I like the way that Dehya herself is designed. I can see what MiHoYo did when it comes to Dehya letting go of her weapon doing Elemental Burst. She has this entire, let's call it cat theme to her, and she basically attacks with her claws. So In my opinion, that's good character design. But there are also a few problems. I'm not going to disregard everything the community says when it comes to her. There's a reason why people are unhappy, right? For example, the fact that jumping cancels her elemental burst is weird. I mean, why is that even there? They had the chance to fix it doing testing, but they didn't. And now they are saying it's intended. So I guess people better get used to not using their jumping while they use Dehya's elemental burst. Next we have her auto attacks, and when it comes to her auto attacks, I feel like they hit like a wet noodle. You have characters like Raiden Shogun who hit almost as hard as Dehya does, even though Dehya is using a big boy claymore weapon. So I feel like her auto attacks need a buff, a small buff at least. She doesn't have to hit as hard as Eula, but a small buff would be nice. When it comes to her E ability, the damage in itself I think is fine. The mitigation is very nice. I really like that mechanic, but the cooldown is too long. 20 seconds is just way too long. By the time that Dehya uses her E ability again, other characters have already used it again and are about to use it a third time. So I guess the best solution would be to simply reduce the cooldown of her E ability by a few seconds. That's all they need to do, at least in my opinion. When it comes to her Q, her elemental burst, we already talked about the jumping, but regarding the damage output, mine hits for 25k per swing. You have 10 swings in total, so that's 250k within 4 seconds. So I feel like that's okay. But then again, I also have Constellation 1, I have a signature weapon, I have really good artifacts, so maybe I'm not the best example. Maybe she really needs a buff when it comes to that. I mean, I'm not going to say no, right? If people want her to be buffed and if MiHoYo listens to it, then who am I to say no, right? I will gladly take that buff. So yeah, that's basically it. As a summary, I feel like Dehya is not as bad as some people make her to be, but she's also not perfect, and she could definitely use some buffs. With that, we are basically done with the guide. I quickly want to point out that this is the first video on the channel, as you can see obviously, so I'm entirely new to all of this. If you liked the video, feel free to leave a comment or a like, or I don't know, maybe even a sub. I do plan to make more guides and general Genshin Impact videos, so if you have any suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comment section. Other than that, thanks for watching the video, have a nice day, evening, night, wherever you live, and I will see you guys in the next video.